Hey, Amr. Welcome back.
Thanks.
So we want to talk about the second layer of security that we've defined in our layered approach to security, which is border security. Border security, and I guess related to that is remote access. So could you define for our audience what do we mean? What do we mean by border security?
Sure. So border security is the security that you implement, security features that you implement at the edge of the network or the border of the network.
Okay.
So in most organizations, you have a corporate network. That corporate network may reside in one or more locations. Sort of in a traditional network setup. And each location is then connected to the internet.
Yep.
There's a key piece of equipment that is responsible for connecting a corporate network to the internet, and that's the router, also known as the firewall. So the essential, the operational component, the key operational component of border security really is the router or the firewall that you choose to connect your organization to the internet.
Got it. And so if you can expand a little bit more on routers and firewalls, what are the features that typically a modern network needs to have in their firewall or router device to be, in your opinion, to be well protected?
Sure, so that's a great question. Essentially, the job of a router is to do two things.
Right.
It is to allow computers on a network to access the internet. So essentially, the internet sharing capability of the router, and this, in this regard, it's similar to most people's routers at home. So you've got an internet connection, you've got an internet router, and everybody in the house is accessing the internet through that one router. So similarly, in an organization, the job of a router is to allow multiple devices to access the internet using a single internet connection. So that's one aspect of the router. So most routers do a pretty good job of allowing devices to access the internet. But where a corporate router, specifically a firewall, is different, is that the firewall must act to protect those computers that are on the network from threats that are coming from the internet. So that's where the firewall capabilities come in. Right. So the fundamental job of a firewall is to block inbound access from the internet to internal corporate devices. That's the fundamental job of a firewall. So if you think about it this way, that a firewall is blocking all unsolicited access from the internet internally to the network, except where there are some exceptions defined. And those exceptions are typically defined based on services that are running inside the network that external users may need to access. So for example, if you have a corporate email server running on your network, then the firewall must contain some exceptions to allow email in to your network. Or for example, if you have a remote access server, say a remote desktop server, a remote desktop gateway, then the firewall must have exceptions to allow a remote access from the outside of the network. So those are basically two aspects of functionality to the router. The one is the router aspect, and the other is the firewall aspect.
Sure.
But from a security perspective, it's really the firewall aspect that needs to be looked at. And in addition to the basic firewall functionality, which is essentially block everything that's coming in with these exceptions. In addition to that basic functionality, a good corporate router should have some advanced security features.
Sure.
And a lot of times these advanced features are delivered through a paid subscription, which is normally renewable on an annual basis. So if your organization has a router, but you're not subscribing to the advanced security feature of that router, then you're not really doing a good job of protecting your network against internet threats. So some of the features of the advanced security package. There are many different router manufacturers and models available on the market, but they generally all have an optional, in many cases, paid annual subscription or an advanced security subscription. So some of the features that the advanced security subscription adds to the router are, for example, antivirus. So within your corporate network, you have antivirus deployed on all of your endpoints, on all of your desktops and laptops and servers, but the advanced security subscription brings antivirus functionality right to the router device itself. Right. So as attachments are being downloaded or files are being downloaded from the internet, the router itself would have an antivirus engine that is scanning content to make sure that it's virus free before allowing it on the network.
Sure.
And then there are other features as well, like intrusion prevention, where a router is detecting active intrusion attempts, attempts by hackers or hacker type processes, attempts to penetrate your network are being blocked by your router and also being logged and alerted. And other features, for example, the ability to block based on geography. So you may wish to block, this is not as common, but you may wish to block traffic coming from certain geographical areas around the world. You may wish to block access to certain websites based on their content. So a content filter is another feature of most advanced security packages. So it's absolutely essential that if a company invests in a good corporate router, that they also invest in the advanced security protection, which is in most cases an annual paid subscription.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for that. So quickly, especially for some of the smaller companies that come to us for a managed services offering, what are some of the mistakes that you've seen with regards to border security in smaller companies before they've really been enlightened as to what they should be doing?
So some of the common mistakes are organizations relying on the internet service provider's equipment only to connect them to the internet. In many cases, the internet service provider will provide a router. They'll almost always provide a router. That router may have some basic firewall functionality, but that's one major mistake that we see, especially some of the smaller organizations. They've got their network, they've got a lot of desktops and laptops, they may even have servers, but the device that they've chosen to use that connects into the internet is just the internet service provider's equipment. So that's mistake number one. Another common mistake we find is a lot of organizations purchasing consumer grade router devices from retail outlets. These devices, most of us may have them at home. They're fine for a consumer context, but they really don't provide very many security features, especially the ones that I've described under the advanced security category. So that's a second mistake that many organizations make. And then the third one we've seen is that even if they have invested in a proper corporate grade, business grade firewall, they're not subscribing to the advanced security features of that firewall. So yeah, that's the third common mistake that we see.
Got it. So just to wrap this up, what tends to be our approach here at IndusFlow with regards to border security and remote access? What kind of products are we using? I know there's a number of different vendors out there that produce routers and firewalls. What tends to be our package?
So our approach, has changed over the years. Yeah. We sort of had standardized on SonicWall as a platform for many years, but more recently we've sort of focused more on Cisco Meraki. So the Cisco Meraki MX series of products, the MX64 being the most common small business class router, and then the MX84 for larger organizations, larger networks. These routers are fantastic, of course, with the advanced security subscription, which is very important. What we really like about the Cisco Meraki line is that they contain, of course, a lot of the basic features that many corporate grade firewalls like SonicWall or Fortinet or WatchGuard, provide, which is obviously access to the internet, a nice advanced security subscription that you can subscribe to, but also the ability to have multiple WAN connections, right? So many organizations that rely on the internet, if your internet goes down, then you're out of luck. And with so many organizations now accessing cloud-based services, a significant aspect of the functionality for the day-to-day functionality for users may be sitting on the cloud.
Sure.
So for your organization to rely on just one internet connection is pretty risky. So the fact that your router should be able to support multiple internet providers, with an automatic failover feature, that is that feature is found in many of the corporate grade routers out there. So certainly Cisco Meraki provides that. But the other thing that is really great about the platform is that their cloud-based analytics are fantastic. So with many router products, what happens is that if you want to really do a lot of analysis, especially historical analysis of what's been going on the network, you may have to activate certain logging features on the device in order to begin capturing data so that you can later on analyze it. But a lot of times that's kind of after the fact. So, a customer might come to us and say, well, an hour ago the internet was really slow, what's going on? Or we tend to have this issue, we tend to have an issue with our internet, on Wednesdays at 3 p.m., like what's happening. So for us to be able to look back and do a historical analysis of what's been happening with the internet is difficult with many router products, because you would have to enable the logging features in order to capture that data. With Cisco Meraki products, that logging is on all the time.
Right.
And because the logging is not stored on the router device itself, it's stored on a cloud-based portal, on cloud-based dashboard. There's a lot of rich historical data that's just available by default. So it's very easy for our technicians to, access the web-based portal to look back a week or more than that, and see what the historical trends are. When has internet usage been highest? What applications account for a lot of that internet usage? And what users or what devices on the network, account for the bulk of that internet usage. So we really like the platform for those reasons, and today anyway we are pretty much standardizing on that platform.
Got it. So one last question rather is, what value does a managed services company bring in when it comes to border security? Because there might be this idea that as a company I can simply hire an IT person to come in, install the router, firewall, and then leave. But in terms of ongoing monitoring and ongoing support, what value does a managed services provider provide with regards to maintaining a router?
So I think basically the value is in two areas.
Okay.
One is monitoring, right? So an organization may have an internet outage, and certainly most internet providers aren't going to let you know when you have an internet outage. Typically the users will find out first. But having a managed services partner means that we are also monitoring your internet connection 24/7. So we'll know when there were internet outages. Sometimes those outages may be after hours. Certainly if those outages are during business hours, then your users would probably know about it first, even before your managed services partner, because they're affected by it. But of course, if you have automatic failover with two internet connections, then the users may not notice when the failover occurs. So having a managed services partner who's keeping an eye on your internet connections, who knows when failovers are happening because they're receiving alerts, and then are able to proactively remediate. Main internet connection 1 goes down and the system switches over to internet connection 2, so your users don't notice it, but now internet connection 1 is out of commission. So an organization that's not monitoring that maybe using their backup internet for a long time.
Sure.
And then if that connection experiences a problem, then there's no failover anymore. So having a managed services partner sort of on top of those things is definitely of value. And then of course changes, right? So a lot of organizations may wish to make changes to their firewall. There are security. Security is in a constant state of change right now. And so having a partner who understands what security changes are happening out there, on the internet, in the world, and then being able to bring that knowledge to the configuration of your router, and not just as a one-time basis, but on an ongoing basis. That's really something of value as well.
Got it. Well, wonderful, Amr. Thank you so much for that, and we'll talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.